Hello and welcome to part 4. In this part I will be going over all of the critters. So, first I will start with Spider. Spider has very simple movement, moves up, down, or diagonally in a given direction, never swapping directions. The direction is determined by its starting location. Let's look at that. So, here we have its initializer, where it will determine where it is and give itself a timer and basic instantiation. So yes, and then the initialize is all of the components of that minus reinitializing things that don't need to be initialized, like the sprite and the bitmap. The update. Update is the largest portion of the spider. It will check its frames traveled. Its frames traveled is much larger than any other critter, simply because its movement is greater. And so it will move along until it has reached that point, where it will then activate its Eat Mushroom, which simply gets at its current location, and if there's anything there, then it will remove it. Then it will determine its next move. It's random whether or not it will go down or it will go in its given... whether or not it will simply go down or up or move in its given direction as well, thus making it diagonal. That is basically it for the spider. Its main purpose is to move from one side of the screen to the other and try to trip the player up. Spider Factory, again, Singleton. The Singleton has a stack that keeps track of the spiders, and I actually put the sound manager stuff in the spawn, so it will start playing when the spider is created in the factory, as opposed to initialized in its constructor. Then there's the recycling. Very similar. Again, there's the wave manager marking and demarking of the scorpion, the spider, just keeping track of making sure there is one spider on screen at a given time, and that one spider, like, just making sure that it can die when it's supposed to, which there are a lot of different cases when the spider should die. And proper deletion of the bin when the game is over. Moving on to the Scorpion. Scorpion, very, very simple, moves left or right across the screen in a given direction, and it will not move up or down. So for this, very similar, checks its direction, determines which way it should be going. Unlike the spider, which is told which direction it's going. This one determines it for itself, and then will go in that direction. It will, whenever it's, so its speed is another thing that is a variable. So when its speed is altered, the times that it's checked in frames traveled is actually lessened. So the faster it goes, the more often the frames traveled thing is being called. That is simply to make sure that it is calling it at the correct intervals. Because I had a problem where it was skipping over things. It was skipping over looking at things. That was a minor problem. It'll also check whether or not it's off the screen. If it's off the screen, it'll kill itself. Without adding the player points. As you can see, I used to have it on collision, but I changed that. So now it's talking to the field, getting the information from the field, and then poisoning it through the field. On its destruction, it will call its sound. It'll call its death sound. And the explosion factory will create an explosion. Just like all the critters, all of the critters will create an explosion when they die. And it will also add its points up here only if it is hit by a bullet. So that is all for the Scorpion. Once again, Scorpion Factory, Singleton, has a bin, creates a new one if it needs to, reuses if it can, marks itself, demarks itself, and will delete the bin when it's dead, or when the game is done. On to the final critter, the Flea. Flea moves down, only down. Very simple, randomized position, goes down, and will randomly check itself to see whether or not it can spawn a mushroom. So this is the only critter other than the centipede itself that can spawn mushrooms. And how it does that is it does the same thing of the frames traveled. Every time it has traveled a certain amount of frames, it will check below it and see, or it'll check where it's at and see if there's a mushroom there. If there is a mushroom, it won't spawn another to avoid placing two mushrooms on top of each other. If there isn't a mushroom, it will randomly determine whether or not it's okay to plant a mushroom there. And also, it needs to check that it is not hit. If it has been hit, it will speed up, but will stop dropping mushrooms. Once it reaches the bottom, it will destroy itself. So that is it for the Flea. It has an initialize because it also is using a factory. And on a collision, it will set hit to true and then speed itself up. Otherwise, and if it has already been hit before, it will destroy itself. This was just a way to avoid having a health because it's rather unnecessary to have the centipede or to have the Flea have a health. Flea Factory, once again, is a regular simple factory. Deletes itself, creates a new if it can, creates a reused if it can, marks itself, demarks itself with a wave manager to keep track, make sure there's only one. And that is it for the critters. Now I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to bring up the managers next. Alright, so I misspoke, and I will not be doing the managers next, but rather I will be basically doing loose change for this section, things that I have mentioned before but haven't explicitly told you about. First up is the explosion. Explosion creates itself, plays its animation, and then kills itself. So very, very simple. It will start itself off, count its frames until it's done with its animation, and then it will simply remove itself from the game through the use of its factory. So the explosion is also using a factory to avoid any unnecessary creations. This factory is handled the exact same way as all the other factories. Except it doesn't mark itself and demark itself. It is more similar to the blaster or the mushroom factory. Next, I will be bringing up the flyweight pattern, specifically the preparation points. So first we have the sprite sheet, where it will grab the texture and break itself apart into the relative pieces. The obviously should look familiar to you, since this was largely your code. Then there's the glyphs. Glyphs, the generic version. Glyphs are the things that contain the things inside of the sprite sheet. They are, yes, they draw the sprite sheet. Then there's the primary font, which is the name that I gave the font that we use in the game. And it is the thing that will look through the sprite sheet for the correct shape or the correct location, really. It's not looking for any shapes. It's looking for just a generic location. And then returning that. So those are the preparation pieces for the text display. And so now I would like to talk about the actual score display. So the score display is a game object that exists, and it simply, on its creation, it will create at three different locations. It will write player's score, the high score, and the player 2 score. Then it will these are three separate things to avoid rewriting the whole line every single time. So yes, here in the update score, it'll check which score has been altered, and then it will edit that score. It will rewrite that score. And the draw is simply saying whether or not the update score needs to happen. And so that is the flyweight pattern implemented into my game. I will be continuing this in part 5, the final part where I will be discussing the managers, the rest of the managers. So, thank you, and see you in part 5.